Okay, this is the second video in my series on encountering the otherness of Barth. I'm joined today by my daughter, who is busy watching a kids channel on my iPad. But what I do, instead of going through the large section detailing the number of problems that biblical scholarship will find with Barth's own Romans commentary, I thought what I'd do first is establish exactly what it is that biblical scholars might ask when reading Romans 8 to 16, which will give us a foil for understanding and contrasting Barth's own enterprise and what he's attempting. So what might a biblical scholar do when engaging Romans 8 to 16? Well, first they will want to ascertain the extent of this or that pericope. You know, make a case that, say, the first 8 verses of chapter 8 is the first section of chapter 8 rather than the first 13 verses of chapter 8, and so on. They will seek to account for the particular contingent historical circumstances driving this or that rhetorical section or subsection. And typically, having established some text critical issues, you know, which manuscripts are we reading, Romans commentaries will then dive into some of the exegetical conundrums. For example, starting in Romans chapter 8, the commentator will weigh up the various arguments for and against whether the law of the Spirit of life in 8:2 means that the law is to be understood here as principle or perhaps as Torah. It will comment on the awkward Greek syntax of the phrase the impossibility of the law in the 3rd verse of chapter 8, seeking to establish its grammatical function. It will ask to what extent the phrase peri amartias, that's in 8:3, relates to the Levitical sin offering or simply sin. And of course much energy will be spent on establishing to what extent, and this is from verse 2, the law of sin and death can be read in ways that correspond to the concerns of the Paul within Judaism or New Perspective on Second Temple Judaism schools. Whether, that is, Paul refers here to something other than the Jewish Torah in toto. Let's run ahead to chapters 9 to 11. Biblical scholars are going to be sensitive to the particularity and persistence of Israel in God's covenant purposes, at least one would hope. The spectre of supersessionism will play a controlling role. And perhaps in Romans 13, Paul's politics and the extent to which the imperial cult should be seen as a foil for Paul's rhetoric are foregrounded, while the repeated language of honour in this and other chapters causes New Testament scholars to plumb the findings of social anthropologists, analysing the Mediterranean social script relating to honour and shame, purity and pollution and such like, to shed light on texts which are defined as addressed to people unlike us. That's absolutely key. Underlying much of this is the concern to establish academic credibility. You know, this isn't devotional, damn it. Thereby setting the project of biblical commentary writing in terms of disinterested or objective scholarship, even if lip service is usually given to more complicated hermeneutical realities in an introduction. In all places, there remains the concern to avoid one of the greatest sins in biblical scholarship, anachronism, and its partner, ethnocentrism. Indeed, the extent to which we see ourselves as those addressed by Paul is the extent to which we are undermining the historical particularity and otherness of Paul's audience, importing ourselves illegitimately and our concerns into the text. So in sum, this is what biblical scholarship wants to ask. Lexical analysis, layered with accounts of syntactical possibilities, concerns relating to pericope, ancient rhetorical functions, and wider matters relating to the textual frame and Paul's cultural encyclopedia will all be foregrounded. And to do otherwise would be to abdicate the task of commentary writing. So in the next video, I'm going to go through Romans 8 to 16, looking at the issues that biblical scholars will have with Barth's own commentary, because as we shall see, it doesn't seem to shape up too well in terms of the demands of contemporary biblical scholarship.